So, welcome to another episode of Stitching Consciousness. Today we have with us Ms Stephanie Strauss, who is basically from Denmark and currently living in Paris and has a rich experience in textiles and sustainable production. Some of the projects that she's involved with include the Whole Brand, Mandatory Agency, and Sustain Learn. So thank you so much, Ms. Stephanie, for being a part of the show. Let's start with a little brief introduction in about your projects and everything that you've been involved in, because I've been researching and I think that you have quite a lot of experience when it comes to production, sustainable production of textiles and consultancies. So a little bit about yourself, please.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. Um, as you said, I was born in Denmark. I did most of my childhood and teenage years in Denmark. I did. I became a pattern designer in Denmark. That's where I started to look into production and what it meant when you are from an European country to work in production. Is that basically you only do the telling. So you tell other people what to do, but you don't actually do any pattern design or any production yourself. So that's when I started realizing how the getting a really good look into what the industry is, how it works, and how it's built. So I very quickly found out that wasn't the path for me. So I decided to do some studies. I did fashion promotion in London. In Denmark, you couldn't at that time really study fashion. So I decided to go to London and do a bachelor's degree in fashion promotion. And during my time there, I was in touch with lots of different companies. The studies I did at the University for the Creative Arts, and they really give you an insight into the whole industry. So we had to do everything from when we received the garment and till retail and also end of life. So I started doing a lot of projects about upcycling, about end of life, and about crafts. I was really interested in the whole idea of producing um, locally. So I ended up doing an internship later on, working for the Year Festival. So it's a fashion and photography festival in the south of France. And they were really good at also introducing me to a whole other part of the fashion industry, which is the creation by young designers and the high end. So this was much more couture, some of it even haute couture. And then I got a job at the Fédération de la Haute Couture. So this is basically the um, council for fashion that organizes Paris Fashion Week. And I started working for them and working with press accreditations and the fashion weeks and how to organize the whole thing. And then, well, as you say, I've done a lot of things. I worked for a lot of brands. I worked later on. I co-created a brand called Whole that we'll maybe get into a little bit later, with where we did natural dyes. I worked for a Danish company called Minimum, where I was in sales and distribution. I came back to the Federation a second time and worked with them on helping young designers um, evolve and do international events. And then I started Mandari Agency with a co-author because I've always been interested in sustainability. And what I learned at the Federation was that the brands that I was working with was a little bit lost on how to work and do real action within sustainability, not just communication. So I founded an agency where we help brands do that and manage the production. And then I later on or here in 2020, I co-created an international online platform for sustainable fashion courses.
Lots to unpack over here. So, would you say that the first time you were introduced to the concept of sustainable fashion was in London?
No, I was introduced to sustainable fashion already as a child. Um, my grandmother on my mother's side did home dyes, so she would use scraps from food and plants that she would find, and then she would dye these threads, usually in wool or in cotton, and then she would knit garments for us. And she taught me about that. I helped her do these processes as a child. And both my mother and my aunts were sewing and taught me how to sew and how to mend clothes and make sure that you can change it and adapt it to you, because we would inherit clothes. We I didn't come from a very fortunate family, so this is how we got clothes when I was a child. But of course, I didn't call it sustainable, or I didn't know that that was what it was. But later on, I realized that that's actually the first time I was in contact with slow fashion and natural dyes and organic, and but in a very sort of natural way for our family.
That is actually very interesting. And I think a lot of us did the same thing, like inheriting clothes before these fast fashion brands came along and people started buying more and more clothes. So I think it's more about going back to the basics and actually going back to whatever we were practicing before all of this started. So you mentioned the whole brand, and firstly, what does the name represent? Why did you choose to name it that? And also, why did you choose to name it in English? Why not like in French or like Danish, unless it has a meaning in other languages as well?
Yes, so for the meaning of whole and why we called it that is that whole represent the W is for waste free, the H is for hand dyed, the O is for organic, the L is for local, and the E is for eco friendly. We wanted to call it that because we wanted the name of the brand to represent what we were imagining. So this is a brand where we would use organic, locally produced textiles. So this is mostly from we were based in Paris at that time, and these are from the north of France that has a really long history in producing linen, especially, but also wool textiles that we would then dye with different dyes. So we would go around to restaurants and juice bars and markets and ask for example, carrot tops. Had a collaboration with a Mexican restaurant where we would get the avocado peels. We would look for different plants and whatever could be like beetroot and other kinds of scraps. And then we would use it to make textile dyes. So the funny story, that we used a lot, was that avocado, which is more of a sort of a dark brown, green, black color, would actually make a very soft pink when you use it. So these are the kind of things that we thought was funny, and we wanted to show the world that you can use these. So we would do mainly textiles for design and interior. So it was we would do linen for beds, or we would do cushions and stuff like that. We later on expanded into clothes for children. But this was already back in 2013, and I don't think Paris, at least, was ready for for this type of sustainable fashion. Uh, the brand still exists, but are specialized now only in doing natural dyes and consultancy about that. and I'm no longer involved in the brand. But it's a really good concept, and it was a really fun time creating it. And we created it in Paris because we were in Paris. The name was in English because we had the idea that it could be sort of a more um, international idea that we could expand, and also it just sounded better. Uh, it was more difficult to do it in French, also because the words are just not the same, and the words around sustainability still today are very confusing. And in French, they are even more confusing than in English. And we didn't do it in Danish because we're a tiny little country, and
Yeah, so that's why I was asking, because I was wondering if there was acceptability or if there was enough market in France or Paris at the time to have such kinds of brands and to have like sustainable production of clothes. So keeping that in mind, do you think sustainability and profitability can go hand in hand? Do you think there now maybe yes, there it might be, but I don't know about France or like generally there's growing awareness, but at the same time, producing sustainably produced goods are a little still expensive compared to fast fashion brands. Obviously, there's a big difference. Do you think there's enough market for people who would be wanting sustainably produced goods, but at the same time they cost a little more?
yes, I really do believe that. First of all, I believe that the two go hand in hand. It has to, otherwise, there's no future for sustainability. Um, but and I do think there is a market for it, not only because financially it will have to cost more, but because fashion in general in the future will cost more because we are in a big problem with raw materials, and I really believe that most raw materials will become more expensive in the future. And then hopefully that will be able to force us into recycling and using whatever we have in a more efficient way. We create about 92 million tons of textile waste every year. And so we are in no way a sustainable industry. But I do believe that if we need, if we have to have a fashion industry in the future, sustainability and profitability has to go hand in hand. It has to be a profitable business. And I do believe it is for some today, people who've actually done it in a very efficient way, have managed some of the most sustainable brands that we know are profitable. So, but of course, with Paul, as we did, it wasn't profitable. It was too the production was too small. It was difficult um, to do collaborations with retailers because we couldn't produce significant amount of textiles. I think that today more and more people, although are interested in consuming locally, I think it's still a little early for fashion, but we do it with food. So if we could educate consumers into understanding the real impact of fashion, which I really think that most consumers are not aware of, then I really think that they would pay more um, for better quality. The problem is today, it's not necessarily about paying more that makes it a better quality. You can buy something that's very expensive and it's poor quality. So it's also about, as a consumer, to understand what good quality is, and that is something that we have lost. Most people cannot just by feel, for example, differentiate the different textiles. Um, I would believe that most people don't know why, for example, t-shirts, when you wash it, they turn because it's poorly cut, usually because it's been in such a high amount of t-shirts or layers of textile has been cut in the same way that some of them are just with textile turned, and when you wash it, it turns back. So And it's understandable. These are very technical things that the consumer doesn't necessarily know about. So, for it to be profitable, we both need the brands to do real sustainability, not just talk about it, but we also need that the consumer understand what that means and how to keep the clothes longer, how to repair it, and even what we need a system for the end of life of what we do with the clothes afterwards, so that it comes into the same circular system and that we don't have to produce so much.
Yeah. Were you disappointed when the whole band did not do as well as you might have thought it would? Especially, I think it was your first business venture at the time.
Sorry, I didn't understand that. What do you mean?
Were you like disappointed when it was not profitable?
Oh, of course, I was disappointed, but it was more. It was I was I don't know. It was my first company, and we were a little ignorant, I think, and a little naive about what a company should be. I wouldn't at all start a company in the same way today, but it was a really really good learning curve for me, just to understand even just the business side of how you create a business in France. I was, as I say, I'm Danish. I didn't come from the French culture. There was a lot of things for me to learn, and that was really good. But yes, of course, it was disappointing.
So do you think the fashion business is inclusive and diverse, especially when it comes to women, when it comes to different races?
Well, actually, the fashion industry is quite diverse in the sense that it's inclusive within. It has mostly women, as you say, women of many different ethnics. It's very open to sexual orientation and gender. But of course, what I assume that you mean is that it's not inclusive and equal in the way that the working conditions are extremely poor. So, of course, it's one of fashion's biggest issues, in my opinion, is the social problems regarding it's mostly women that work, it's a lot of children working in the fashion industry, and they don't have contracts, they don't have welfare, they don't have any security in their employment, and that is a very, very big problem. This is not actually only, we tend to only look at it in Asian countries or South America, but actually, fashion is also a business in Europe where people are being exploited. So a lot of models work for free because they want to be in this industry. It's an industry um, that uh, is really based on desire, not only for buying but also just being in the industry and working in it. So a lot of young people are willing to do a lot to work for free. It's based on internships that are not paid, harassments. There's a lot of problems in the fashion industry, also in Europe. But of course, well, I don't say that one problem is bigger than the other, but one of the main problems is for sure the garment workers around the world and the people that work in the fields of cotton. Um, there's many,
Um,
yeah, examples of that.
it's actually very interesting that you highlighted the problems in Europe as well, because it's usually just talked about, like people usually only highlight the garment workers and the working conditions of the people in the factories. Sorry, and that is very important. But at the same time, there are issues in other parts of the world as well, and the fashion industry has two faces: behind the scenes where you don't see what's actually happening, and then the front, which involves, like you said, models and unpaid internships, which is actually quite a big problem, even though it seems like a very first world problem. It's actually quite a significant issue for those who are actually facing them.
Yeah, yeah. Even
Um,
like during Fashion Week, most people work insane amount of hours, and you don't, you're not paid for those hours. You just have to be there, and then you serve you a glass of champagne saying thank you for being there, or maybe not even thank you, but that is sort of the payment that you get because you then got to see a fashion show. But you've been working for hours and hours, standing up in high heels. There's for sure a lot of issues. And again, it's mostly women, mostly young women. Whereas all the owners of all the big fashion brands and big fashion houses are all men.
Yes, that's a very interesting fact. Okay, so I there's this concept of recycling in sustainable fashion and sustainable production fashion, but at the same time, people are talking about how it's no longer just enough. Like there's more that needs to be looked at, and recycling alone won't solve all the problems. So could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, I totally agree that recycling isn't the answer to all our problems. That is because recycling alone will not prevent that we continue to consume even more. Um, we cannot recycle our way out of the overconsumption. Recycling is also something that use energy and water, chemicals, and manpower. Like it's not just that we take some textiles, we put it into a magic box, and then suddenly comes out as a new textile. That's not how it works. And it's all these tons and tons and tons of clothes and textiles that we produce every year and that we don't use and that end up in landfills. So I think in Europe it's less than 1% of the textiles that we and the clothes that we get in that we uh, collect after that is actually recycled. And very little of the recycling is gone from what we call fiber to fiber, meaning that it was a fiber and becomes a fiber. Usually it's downcycled into something, um, or it's basically just burned or sent into landfills. And the landfills today cannot at all handle it. So there's a European law that has been passed that we are no longer allowed to send textiles to landfills in Europe. And you can imagine that that will resolve the problem. But of course, that doesn't resolve the problem because we have so many tons and tons of waste that we don't know what to do with. Um, that it's sent off to countries that do not have the right recycling stations, so they cannot actually recycle it. Although maybe the fibers had the potential of being recycled. McKinsey and Company just uh, came out with a report about recycling that says that actually 70% of the textiles that we have the possibilities of being recycled, but it's just not. It's less than 1%. So it's a very complex topic. This thing about recycling, and we need to invest more in it. We need policy laws to be able to recycle more, but it's not the solution to the overconsumption. We have to also find other solutions. We have to produce way less than we do now, um, because it's not a problem that you can fix just one in one place. Sustainability, it's about the whole, not even just supply chain, the whole garment life cycle that has to be reviewed, and we have to find solution to all of it. Um, but recycling is a good idea. It's certainly something that could become profitable. So it is something that more companies are looking into, but not in a large scale that can actually handle the textiles that we have today. It's even about um, the, the sorting of the clothes. That is a problem. Today, it's easier, for example, to recycle monofibers, so it's textile that is only 100% cotton or 100% polyester. But it's difficult if there's a button or if there's a stip, or even if you have a t-shirt that's 100% cotton, maybe the label is in polyester, and then it becomes a problem. So there, we don't today has a we don't have a system that can handle this in a very efficient way.
Yeah, that's true, and that's also why designers are being now taught to design clothes in a circular way, keeping circularity in mind, so that they don't put in designs, or like they don't put in fibers which are difficult to upcycle later on.
Mm.
I loved what you said, that we cannot recycle our way out of overconsumption. I think that very nicely sums up the whole recycling debate. That people say that at least we're doing something, which is true, but at the same time, overconsumption needs to be controlled as well.
Yeah,
So, how important do you think innovation and research is to finding sustainable solutions to these problems?
it is essential. Um, Fashion today is not something that is probably studied. We don't look at fashion in the same way as we do as technology or medicine or physics. Fashion or literature, or whatever other topics. Fashion is something that is just pure production, uh, and then you sell it. So it's business school, maybe if you work in retail. Otherwise, it's not really something that you study for. It's an industry you can just go into. Research would for sure help us to understand the impact better. So one of the biggest issues we have when you work with sustainability is that we don't have the exact numbers. We are lacking information, we are lacking science-based research. So most of the numbers that we have, the research that we have, is from the brands themselves, or researchers that has been paid by the brands to do research. So of course they want it in their favor. Um, in the Latin countries, so France and Italy and Spain, you cannot actually study a PhD level in fashion. You can do that in England, the United States, Scandinavian countries, but it's not at all enough. And it's not a field that's very attractive because it's very difficult to get a job afterwards um, as a researcher. There's no labs. Maybe the lab about the London College of Fashion has done a lab for sustainability, but other than that, there's not really that many labs that can actually take in researchers. Um, so research and innovation is really, really important. Um, the innovation is important because we need new techniques, we need new fibers, and there's a lot of that going on. A lot of startups are working on that. But we need research because they need to look at the industry as a whole. We need people to investigate the real impact of things. We don't actually know what the real impact of certain items are, and especially not afterwards and on a big scale. You can maybe follow one t-shirt and say, okay, the impact of one t-shirt is this. But that is if the t-shirt follows the exact same path. And it doesn't. Like some t-shirts go like are produced in 5 different places or maybe in 15 different places. And some of them go to one country, the others go to another country. It's not like all t-shirts the cotton is produced in Africa and then it's spun in Bangladesh and then sewn there and go to Europe. There's tons of different paths. If you would create a map of the path of different clothes, it would be black from all the different strains that we would draw. So we need researchers to look at the overall impact of things. Um, and then innovation should be after the research, the innovation should find a solution to the problem. Today that's not how we work. We have a small problem someone has talked about, and then innovators find a solution to that. So it's not based on research, and that is a huge problem. So I really really think that education and research are very important if we need real change.
You have very nicely summed up the two, and like you made the linkage between the two. And I personally understand it much better now, because I've asked this question to many people, so now but I now understand it much better, how more new research and then innovative solutions to that research is needed. Credible sustainability, and how you said that brands do their own research and then put that up as a marketing or a communication strategy. What do you have to say about that, like credible sustainability and about greenwashing and policies that are required to tackle that, basically, and consumer consciousness?
Mm. Again, it's a very complex topic. But greenwashing is a very hot topic at the moment. So, because there's a new part of the Green Deal, the European Green Deal, are actually focusing on greenwashing. And we are seeing more and more governments and institutions that are fighting against it. So, lately, we've seen that the Higgs index are in trouble because they are doing greenwashing. It's not actually something that brands can say that they use. The Norwegian government has prohibited the use of um, the Higgs standard for materials. It was sort of it's a classification of materials saying one is more sustainable than the other, and they found out that that's not actually true because again we don't have the exact research to support it, so it's just what people think. And then lately, H&M has just been sued in California because their use of conscious is not actually true, which I think most people already knew that. But it's a nice way that the governments and the laws are coming in to support this. So greenwashing is a very big problem. Um, it's something that happens. They did a survey in the European Union, and they estimate that about 35 to 40% of all brands are doing greenwashing. Greenwashing can be something that you do where you actually are trying to deceive the consumer. The greenwashing can also just be from pure ignorance. A lot of brands are greenwashing, but they don't actually know it. Um, so, greenwashing, if you want to avoid it, you really have to back everything up that you say with documentation, with links to whatever labels you're linking to or you're saying that you're part of. And you have to be very specific. Um, Saying that something is sustainable doesn't mean anything. Saying something is conscious, green, all of these words do not mean anything. You cannot measure it. So we need to also talk in the industry. We have to decide in the industry what this word means, because that is, in my opinion, a big issue. We use these words so frequently, being eco-friendly or carbon neutral. Nothing is carbon neutral. It just doesn't exist, and you cannot be 100% sustainable. Again, it doesn't exist unless you do nothing. So, so there's a big problem with the words. There's a problem with the lack of documentation and the lack of being able to measure it. And now we are seeing these initiatives from the law that come in and support all these problems and saying that you can actually be punished now for doing greenwashing. And in my opinion, the biggest problem with greenwashing is that it minimizes the brands that are actually trying to do something good. It's not so much the problem that H&M, it is also a problem, but if you know a little bit about fashion, you know that it's not true when they say something is conscious. It's just a way for consumers. We like to buy something that is conscious and saying, "Oh well, then it's fine. Then I can buy my T-shirt at €3." But if you have a certain understanding of sustainability and the fashion industry, you do know that that's not true. The problem comes when other brands or things like the Higgs index, it's something that is very used and something that we will trust. There's a lot of trust regarding that label, or it can be the Better Cotton Initiative. It's the same thing that suddenly a documentary come out and say that they actually mix the organic cotton with other non-organic organic cotton, then we feel deceived because even us in the industry that works with it, we need to be able to trust other companies and other institutions. I cannot do everything on my own. I cannot follow a production around the world to see if it's sustainable. So we need these to avoid greenwashing, but we also need a higher level that also look into these initiatives to make sure that they are actually being trustworthy, and that we support the brands that are actually trying to do something sustainable so that the consumer are not as confused as I think they are today about what is actually green and what is not, and what is the real transparency.
Yeah, and also words like sustainability don't really have a proper like universal definition either. So they can mold it according to whatever they want it to be.
For sure, for sure. There's even the word like we. It's a very um, common word at the moment to say vegan leather. It does not mean anything. There's not vegan leather. Vegan means that it doesn't involve animals, and leather is by definition the skin of an animal. So it's very contradictory. But we
Yeah,
say it because vegan is a very trendy word in food, and then fashion just adopted it. But the Portuguese has now actually banned the word. You're no longer allowed to use the word vegan leather because it is confusing to the consumer, and that most what they call vegan leather is not produced from vegetables, is actually produced with petrol and oil because it's synthetic. And I don't think you can say that petrol doesn't kill animals and the environment. So it does have an
yeah,
impact on the biodiversity, um,
yeah.
and that is also an impact on animals. So it's not actually vegan.
Well, I didn't know about that before. So yeah, that's interesting to learn. How successful do you think the EU strategy would be to make fast fashion go actually out of fashion?
Um, I'm not sure that their strategy is to eliminate fast fashion. I think their strategy is to make sure that all brands, whether it's what we call fast fashion, super fast fashion, or very high end, should take into consideration circularity and should design out of circularity. Um, it's a very ambitious strategy. Um, I'm not sure that, I'm hoping that it will happen. I think it needs a lot of investments, a lot of money, and a lot of education. I really believe that that's some of the things that we really need. Um, because if fast fashion is to really change, of course, it would not be so fast. Um, but it's a
Yeah,
whole business model that has to change. Um, and I'm not sure that with the power that they have and the amount of money that they have, that is how it's going to be. I'm hoping that they will implement more sustainable strategies so that they will be forced to not overproduce so much, but that will also change their business model. So I don't exactly know how the EU is imagining the problem with fast fashion because it's changing their business model completely, and they're not going to do that within 2030.
yeah. Yeah, it is quite ambitious. So, what do you think is required to tackle these ambitious goals and to accomplish, if not 100%, then at least get somewhere?
It will never be 100% because that's what we just talked about. Nothing, unless you don't produce, it's not 100% sustainable. It will always use some energy or water, but there's certainly a lot of things that can be done, and it can improve in many ways. Um, what I really think needs to be done is, in my opinion, first three things. So first, we need um, legislation that can help us with guides. So that means that there has to be certain laws, there has to be definitions. We have to agree on what is sustainability and what does these sustainable goal mean. Being more equal doesn't mean anything either. It's a beautiful thing, but we have to make sure that we agree on things. Just to give you an example, we talk about minimum wage and a minimum of living standard, and it's not the same thing. So you can get a minimum wage, where it doesn't actually support if the women has that. That is the legal requirement, but it does not. In most countries, it's not enough for her to support her family, to make sure that her children go to school. Um, so that is not the same, and these are things that we need to be sure that we define these goals. It was just an example. There's many examples that has to be defined more clearly. The second thing we need is investments. We need money for initiatives. We need money for education. We need money for brands that are doing things. We need money for labels, and without money, nobody's going to actually do all these changes because we're not going to do it by themselves. The profitability is, as we talked about earlier, is really important. Um, and we need that also to do research. If the researchers are not paid, they're not going to be able to do it. Nobody can take out 7 years of their lives to do sustainability if they're not paid for it. So we need to put money into real projects, and the European Commission is doing that, but it's very difficult to get those money, and sometimes it's the bigger organizations that has the power to do that and to do the applications that get the money. But I really believe we need to invest in research because, as we said, that is the base of where we should be starting if we want to achieve these goals. We need to understand where is the real impact, because where would we start? What is the most impactful place and part of this supply chain where we need to do real action? If we start with the one that's less impactful, then we will never achieve it because we have very little time. So that would be the first thing. And then the third thing that I really think we need is education, and on all levels. So we need to educate students in sustainability. Most design students don't have sustainability as the integrated part of their course. It's maybe a short um, master class that they have sometimes. And we need sustainability to be really integrated in all design studies. We also need that all the workers today get education so that they know in their part of their job can they be more sustainable, how are they aware of being sustainable, and then of course we need training within the companies so that they can implement, because most company has the strategy of becoming more sustainable, but they forget to train the people who are supposed to implement it on a daily basis. And for them, it's not always very clear how to be more sustainable. How do this carbon neutral idea, how does that affect their work and what they're doing? And this is in all parts of the job, so like from designers. Okay, so we understand that you need to change fibers, but it's also, as we talked about, imagining the end of life and how it will be recycled. That is also for the buyers, but it's also in marketing. How do you educate your consumers? How do you talk to them? How do you avoid the greenwashing and social washing and purple washing? There's tons of washing. It's not just about the eco bragging, it's also about social issues. But we need education so that we understand it better what we are supposed to do in each of our fields.
Yeah, and education would actually change the demand as well, which would mean that the fashion business would, won't have a choice but to change because they care about demand at the end of the day. They care about business and money that they're getting. So if people who start becoming more conscious of what they're buying and what they're investing their money in, it might bring about the biggest change maybe. But at the same time, if they're educated with the right stuff, not with the greenwashed information.
for sure.
So could you tell us a little bit about Culture Day Mode as well?
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correct. I know it's a French
Yeah,
word.
it's fine. It's called culture de mode, but it's the culture of fashion. It's a research network that we created. So it was created by Sophie Curpion, um, and it's it's this, as we already talked about, this need for research and for real collaboration within the fashion industry. So this is what we wanted to do is, or what we are trying to do is to connect actors that are not necessarily directly in the fashion industry, so in the production sites or in a fashion brand. We are trying to connect, for example, researchers. As we said, there's not researchers specific to fashion, but there are researchers who are in sociology or anthropology, and then they have specialized in fashion. So they're talking about fashion issues. And we're connecting those with curators or with archivists. So the archiving of fashion is a really big thing. Is that we have all this fashion knowledge um, from years and years of history, but we don't really use it in any way. So and then with students and with entrepreneurs and anybody who is linked to fashion, the idea is that we come together and we discuss how what research should be invested in, how should what research do we need, and also try to put a light and help the researchers that are actually there to so that their research can come out and can be used for something. Um, the network, we do master classes, we do visits of archives, we do talks, we do these exchanges um, with different actors within the industry to figure out how we, as a common group, can tackle the different problems in fashion.
And is it international or just in France?
It's international. A lot of the information is currently in French because we are collaborating with the Ministry of Culture in France, and they of course also want most of the information in French. But the site is also in English, and we are currently trying to get some finances so that everything can be translated into English. So, for example, we've done a map of all the in France all the fashion archives so that researchers can see what is available. That could be hugely interesting to do it on a European, even on a world level. That would be amazing because there are crafts and archives of fashion everywhere. Um, Maybe a little bit more known in France and Italy because they're historically fashion countries, but the crafts, especially are something that's very local. It's very international because all countries have their crafts that they could still maybe use or at least make sure that we preserve it so that it's still there.
This is a very interesting idea, and I hope like other countries catch on and start doing it as well, and maybe like make it something on a global scale. Um, let's come to sustain learn, and let's talk about. Well, we've already discussed the motivation behind it, maybe, but could you like tell us a little bit more about that? And what's the target audience? Is it just specifically for people with a background in fashion or sustainability and environment, or is it for anyone who's interested in learning more about this?
Yes, well, so Sustain Learn is a platform. It will be launched here in the middle of August. It's a platform for sustainable fashion courses. So you can go in and learn about, for example, we have a course about greenwashing and what are the laws, current laws on it, and how can you, as a brand or as a designer, or even as a student or even as a consumer, figure out or get tricks to see how could you avoid greenwashing, or how can you see and detect greenwashing within brands. We also have courses that are maybe more specific to the industry, for example, about packaging. What can you do, and should you be aware of regarding packaging? And we have courses on materials and other things. Um, so the motivation, as we talked about, is this need that I really feel for education and for a place for knowledge sharing. So the idea is not just, I'm not the one doing all the classes, I'm not the one saying everything, I don't know everything about sustainability. The idea is to get different experts to come in and tell their side of the story, how they work with sustainability, and also get researchers to come and tell what they've found and what they believe is the first actions we need to do regarding sustainability. Um, and the motivation for me, as I do consultancy for brands on how they can transform, and sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes with the brand, I was a little bit frustrated that we were doing strategy work with the CEO or with the director of marketing, but even after years of working with them and following them, I felt that the real actions lower within the supply chain didn't really change. And I felt that sometimes the employees didn't understand this big strategy that was being presented to them without actually without real action behind it and how they should work with it. So they would just continue their work as they've always done, and then that's how it is. They changed maybe the packaging to recycled paper, and then that's it. We did something, and I wanted real change. I wanted something much more profound, and for that I needed to do my own platform where I could express the things that I believe we should do and get all these experts in, which is something that I did with some brands that were very open to researchers and working with schools, for example, and have young students work on a specific problem. Um, that is to me a real good way of working with sustainability as a brand. So I wanted to put that forward. And the target group is for, as I say, for some of the courses, we have different levels. So basic courses are for anybody who's interested in sustainable fashion. We have a course where we discuss, as we also did here, the definitions of words. What is the definition of sustainability versus responsibility? A lot of people are saying that we should not no longer call it sustainable fashion, but responsible fashion. And I question that a lot, saying I don't actually think that will change anything. The two words do not mean anything. But if we look into the definitions of sustainability, means something that's durable. So it's over time, it's over a period of time. So we should expand the period of time, where responsibility is more about the responsibility you take for your actions. So in my work. So these are some of the courses, and anybody can look into those courses. We also have a knowledge test. So we've created this fun little quiz where you can go in and test and see if you know what you know about the fashion industry. It's for free. Everybody can try it. Um, and then we have courses, as I say, for packaging. It's maybe more specific to brands that use packaging to send out clothes, and that what they can do within the company to reduce their impact. And we will also have some that are more on research level. So you probably need to know a little bit more about the industry in order to really follow that class. But it's open to anybody. If anybody can go in and have a look.
And are they going to be recorded classes or live classes, or how is it going to work? What's the structure going to be like? And is there going to be an exam at the end or like a certificate?
Yeah, so they're recorded classes, but that are updated constantly with new laws or with new things. And the idea is that later on we would love to do live classes and live discussions with experts and do these sort of master classes. After each course, you get there's a test, so you have to answer questions about the course that you just learned, and if you pass the test, you get a certificate. And the idea is also to get collaborate with Credible so that you can put it directly on your LinkedIn profile so that you can use it also in a way to maybe if you want to change jobs or if you are looking for a new job, you can use it to go into sustainability and work with sustainability within the field that you are. So if you're a designer or buyer or in marketing.
Right. So coming to upcycling businesses, what advice would you give to anyone who wants to start an upcycling business? Like, what do you think the first few steps should be?
So I'm certainly not an expert. I've never started an upcycling business before. But um, well, what you really need is, as in anything, is that you need passion for it and you need to look into it. There's, as I say, I don't really know so much about upcycling businesses, but I look at companies that do it and I look for inspiration in others. And I think about Louise Lund Bjerregaard, which is a Danish designer but is on the Paris Fashion Week. And she has taken upcycling to a whole other level. It's really inspiring. She is only using dead stock, and she actually takes knitted garments, de-knit them, make them into um, different yarns again, and then knit it into something else. And to me, that is incredible. So this horrible sweater, she can make it into this most amazing dress. Um, so I would say that the first step is for sure to understand it properly and to see what are the possibilities. And then, of course, decide: are you doing a company for, as I say, as her as a designer, as a level of as a high end designer, so in small quantities, or are you imagining doing something on a larger scale? And then there's a whole other issue, for example, regarding where would you get your products from, your raw material, and so on. You just have to put in my. Sorry, I was running out of battery.
Right. I don't know if I'm correct in my observation, but I believe that you're quite a solution oriented person. Whenever you see a problem, you create a solution for it. You observed that there was a lack of research, a lack of knowledge, so you created a solution for it. Then there was like no, lack of sustainable production flows, then you created a brand for it. So is that true?
Well, thank you. I think that's a very lovely observation, and I hope so. It's I think that is maybe my motivation in life is to try and find solutions to the problems that we have. Um, I work in the fashion industry because I'm passionate about textiles and about fashion, and I love the idea and the history of fashion. Um, but I do believe that it's an industry with a lot of issues, and it gives sort of a bad taste in the mouth to be working in fashion today with all the problems, and especially I think as a woman, as a consumer, um, it's horrible. Not only the environmental impact, but also the social impact. So yes, if I should stay in this and work in this industry, I think I needed to work with something that I can be happy with, and I can tell my girls that I did something to try and change the fashion industry. So yes, but thank you for the observation. It's a very lovely way of seeing it.
So in your long career, have you had a mentor in life and in generally in your professional life?
Um, I've not been fortunate to have someone that has followed me throughout my whole career. But I think it's also a problem of having changed country quite a lot. I've lived in Italy for a while. I lived in Berlin. In Paris, in London, in south of France. But I've had people who have helped me get on the path and who has supported me when I wanted to change and wanted to say that I don't agree with how this is done. I need to change that ways. So Jean-Pierre Blanc, which is the director of the Year Festival, has for sure been someone who took me in when I was a young student and didn't know anything. I didn't even speak French very well, and he was really supportive in guiding me and showing me that there's tons of possibilities and you can work in anything. And then Helle Moos, which is a photographer, fashion photographer, she for sure told me about how fashion weeks really works. I was a little green when I came, and I was a little naive in thinking, like most people, we just want to be part of the Paris Fashion Week and go see fashion shows. And she would definitely show me the backside of it and show me the issues. And we would talk a lot about how women, and especially very young women, are treated and um, influenced by this desire to be part of an industry. And she helped me to realize that there's a lot of issues, and really been discussing that with her. And then, of course, brands or people who are working with sustainability. I think there's some women, especially, so some men, but it's really inspiring with women, I think, and see how they do, how they're being entrepreneurs and also having a family life and being a mom. That is also inspirational.
Yeah.
It's not only about people in the fashion industry, but people in general who are trying to do something better for the industry. I think that's very inspirational.
Yeah, that's a very beautiful summation of your professional life. How do you practice sustainability in your own personal life? You mentioned your children and your family. What do you do in your daily life that would reflect that?
Yeah, I think like a lot of people today, I try to have a minimum impact in my own life. So I try to eat vegetables that are within the season and are grown locally. I don't buy so much in supermarkets. I mostly go to the farmers market. Um, and in general, I don't really buy clothes, for example, which is a little ironic when you work in the fashion industry. But I try to mend the clothes that I have, or last week my mom knitted me a sweater. So yeah, I just try to be very conscious about what the impact that I have. I see it as, I don't know if you know the story about the fire, or the big fire that was in the forest, and the colibri is all the animals are running out of the forest, and the colibri, the little bird, is collecting some water and flying back into the forest and dropping the water. The elephant is looking at it and go, "Why do you do that? You're so small. You don't have any impact on the fire. You will never be able to stop the fire." And the colibri is saying, "That's not important. It's important that I participate and that I do my part."
Yeah.
And I've tried to live my life a little bit like that. Is I'm trying to do my part. I'm trying to do the things that I can do. Could I do more? For sure. For sure, I could. We could all do it. I don't have a car, but I use the car sometimes. I fly. I've bought things at H&M and like everybody else, and I'm not at all perfect. It's not about that. But I try to do my part, and I try to especially say that there's a point out the issues, as you say, and try and come up with solutions. I think we need to be positive about it, and we need to see that solutions can happen. And
Yeah.
I believe in humanity that we will be able to do a real transformation.
Yeah, I'm also guilty of shopping from H&M, but it's like so enticing to buy things from there because they're such good clothes, despite knowing that they're not very conscious, is environmentally conscious. Do you still dye your clothes with vegetables?
I haven't done it in a long time. No, no. No, it's a very messy process, and I no longer have the atelier where I could do it. But I love it, and I for sure support brands that use natural dyes because I think it's beautiful, and I think it's a really great story that we can use scraps to make dye.
Do you have any course in doing how to do that at home?
No, but we should
As
definitely
a
do
student?
one. We should maybe do one on how to do it as an individual person. How you can dye your own clothes. That's a good
Exactly.
idea.
Okay, so last question now. So basically, what's one life skill that you think everyone should have, regardless of whatever career they're in, whatever profession they have, but one life skill that they should have?
Curiosity, the willingness to learn. Yeah, we nobody's perfect. Nobody knows everything, and I really think that a lot of issues in the world could be sorted if we were more curious and more open to learning about, for example, other cultures, other ways of doing things, and not being so into saying that I'm right. This is how we should do it, but
Yeah,
trying to be open and curious.
yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you so much, Ms. Stephanie, for being part of this podcast. It was genuinely one of my most favorite episodes so far. It was very interesting to hear you talk about all these things, and you have a very nice way of answering questions as well, like tuck, 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 tuck. Like you have like a proper, direct way, like a flow of thought, which is very easy to follow and understand. And I'm looking forward to some of the courses that you would deliver as well. I hope they're recorded recordings from you as well at Sustain Learn.
Yeah, there will be. Yeah, some of the courses are videos that where I'm talking, and then others will be experts that I'm interviewing or that are doing their own
Right.
classes. So, but thank you, Sania, and thank you for doing this kind of podcast. You are for sure part of the change because, as we say, it's education. It's about inspiring other people to change, and podcasts like this is inspiring and it's easy to listen to, and it's really really nice. So. Good on you and congratulations for doing it. It's really good and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking up the time.